you might have a great ready product, but people aren't using it, right? And so you're able to sell them, but they're actually not using it, and therefore you're going to have a retention problem on the other side of it. You're not ready to scale. You're not ready to go build out a sales team because you've got that leaky bucket. Investor sentiment historically has been sell software, right? It's great margin, it's recurring, and don't be a body shop. Now, ironically, of late, with the advent of LLMs and these new platforms of AI platforms that were not the case when I wrote the book, now there's this concept of, well, is SaaS dead? Are you now going to sell the work?
Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Rags Gupta. He's the author of the book 1 to 10. He was an early GTM executive at Bright Cove, which was recently purchased by Bending Spoons for $233 million. He's currently the CEO of Akita, revolutionizing how we manage blood pressure.
Really excited to have you here, Rags. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here, Brian.
So, Rags, I want to jump in. I mean, first of all, you're author of a book, multi-time early stage company investor, CEO of a company now. I've followed you for many years. We've worked together on a couple projects. Would just love to dive in and ask you some questions. But first, can we talk about your book real quick? I don't know if you've
Sure.
been answering my questions on that lately, but I really love the way you focus into the three phases of an early stage company. The 0 to 1, the 1 to 10, and then the 10 to X. Usually people say 10 to 100 or 10 to 30. So I like that you kind of just put that out there as 10 to X because it's like almost totally different. I'm assuming it's because it's totally different. Do you want to just walk through the stages real quick?
Yeah. So thanks, Brian. Yeah, great to be here again. So during COVID, one of my projects was to write this book. And the reason is I found myself having the same conversation over and over again. And so I had some time on my hands and decided to put it all down. And part of the insight was that there's all this knowledge and insights and tools for entrepreneurs on that early initial stage, the 0 to 1 stage, right? Getting something going, getting your first funding, your first pilots, your first customers. And then you heard about and you read about all these success stories, right? People that have gone IPO, had big exits, and they sort of reflect back on how they did it. But wasn't that much out there on that bit where I saw a lot of startups struggle, which was, it's easier than ever to get to one, however you define it, right? Whether it's getting your first funding, your first customers, and all that. But it was harder than ever, it still is, to scale and get through that sort of awkward adolescent stage for a startup, right? Where you're learning how to delegate as a founder, you're learning how to build out an org, you're being more thoughtful about culture, you need to get a team to sell when you're not in the room, right? These kinds of things. And so that was, hence the concept of 1 to 10 and really having something focusing on that stage for entrepreneurs in that moment.
You talk about the three core areas, the product readiness, the sales repeatability, and the scaling people. Can you just unpack I see often like this conflict between, it's the product, it's a typical sales team versus product team argument, even at bigger companies. How does a company know if it's the product or if it's a sales from your perspective, especially in the early days?
Yeah, look, it is chicken and egg, right? Of course, is the product ready to scale versus is it how you're selling it? I think if you think about it, this 1 to 10 phase is really validating you have product market fit and that you're delivering value to customers and they know how to value that. And so if you look at leading metrics around that, that's what I look for. Like, what are the leading indicators that there's something there in the product, right? It could be usage, engagement metrics, whatever it is, right? That those are really important to know if you have it. And then you can have some rough edges, and then there's some table stakes features that you need, right? So you might have people going crazy about your product, but then others are saying, you know what, I can't buy that until I have SOC 2 compliance. Okay, that's table stakes feature, fine, right? But you know you got something, you know you're on your way on the product readiness side when you have the SOC 2, right? But you might have a great ready product, but people aren't using it, right? And so you're able to sell them, but they're actually not using it, and therefore you're going to have a retention problem on the other side of it. You're not ready to scale. You don't, you're not ready to go build out a sales team because you've got that leaky bucket.
Right, and I see so many times when people are building out that sales team and they shouldn't. That's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah.
And then it's the scaling people. What are the biggest problems you see there?
Like, what are the ones that commonly happen? Right. One is the folks that got you to a certain point might not be the ones to help you scale it. Right. It's sort of like, if you want to use the metaphor of bushwhacking, right? There's people with a machete that are just whacking the bush, but then you need people to kind of like, have a path. And then eventually you need people to pave it, right? And those are different people, different mindsets. And so sometimes just recognizing that and figuring out roles for people, inside or outside your company. Second is delegation. As a founder, it's very natural to want to do everything, right? And have your finger in everywhere. And you got to figure out the right level of delegation, where you really drill in and where you rely on your team that's around you to do it. And that's very related, which is recruiting. So oftentimes founders have started this with their friends and they've pulled those in, but now how are you going to recruit a proper management team? How are you going to run it? What's like the cadence and rituals that you have as a company? And then lastly, I'd say it's not so well covered or talked about, but is co-founder dynamics. Like in almost every company, right? There's usually one of the founders that one way or the other steps up and takes on more of a leading role as a CEO or whatever it is. And then the other founder or founders are taking other roles, right? And that can be emotionally fraught. That can be, difficult and sometimes toxic if you don't figure that out in the right way, right? And respecting everybody's, sensibilities, egos, whatever it is. And so that's something where it can drive companies. It can destroy value, right? If you don't figure that out, that, founder transition and founder roles and responsibilities.
I think there's a coaching or therapy business that's just focused on founder dynamics, because it is kind of like a marriage, right? It's kind of like, I make a joke. You're going to spend more time with your business partner for many years of of those periods of time than you will your spouse. It is
100%. It's like 100%. It's like founder therapy or whatever it is. I remember I gave a talk at the Harvard iLab. And, it's these like super early stage founders. And I think it was about the book. And I said, guys, like, if you're successful, then you're not going to do like the co-CEO or whatever it is. Like, you guys are going to have awkward, real conversations with your co-founder about who takes that role on, who doesn't, whatever. And it was like the squeaky bump. People were sort of like squirming awkwardly in their seat, right? Because in the early days, it's all like, yeah, we'll share it. We'll do everything together, right? And then that's not the case as you grow. And so that's really important to call out.
I like asking the question. If I write you $1 million check right now, who's going to be the CEO?
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
In your book, there's a part in it that you said something, and I think you and I have talked about this before, that I didn't disagree with it, and I didn't agree with it. It's like one of those I love to think. It still makes me think about it. Is you talk about having a service business or a professional services, and almost every VC will disagree with that, or often they'll be getting advice not to build that. I always hear you can't have a professional services. VCs hate it, et cetera. Can you unpack that for me? I know you use Palantir as the case study of your example, I think, but
I think there's a couple things. I think first is if you're selling software, right, and enterprise software in particular, so contextualizing this, right, if you're selling enterprise software, people want to just like they just want to sell it and be done with it and so on. And usually, one way or the other, you're gonna have to stand up some sort of professional services arm to help implement it and so on. Why? Because customers need it. They need to have it implemented the right way, and those customers tend to be happier customers, longer customers. And by the way, you're then getting insights into what they want. And so those insights can eventually make their way back in the platform or product that you're selling. And so you don't want to be a body shop, of course, and be a PS group, but in general, enterprise companies will need to, have something like that. So that's number one. Number two is those business model wise, the investor sentiment historically has been sell software, right? It's great margin, it's recurring, and don't be a body shop, right? Now, that's a second thesis, which is actually, if you're tech-enabled services provider, it's all about the margin and your growth. And so you could be like Palantir. They're essentially like a tech-enabled service provider, managed services, and they're being rewarded by good multiples and valuations because they're not selling you they're not licensing a platform to you, right? They're saying, hey, here's the different building blocks and puzzle pieces we have combined with our expertise, and we will get you the results. Now, ironically, of late, with the advent of LLMs and these new platforms of AI platforms that were not the case when I wrote the book, now there's this concept of, well, is SaaS dead? And are you now going to sell the work, right? I.e., don't license your LLM wrapper or whatever to others, but just be a law firm that actually does much more work for much cheaper at a greater margin using LLMs, right? And so there's this concept of that's now kind of coming back into vogue, right? To sort of look at it from a different lens and say, you know what, let's just sell the work instead of actually selling a license.
It's like musicians. It's like Taylor Swift selling concerts, making $1 billion a year on concerts instead of and music, but even more on the concerts.
That's right.
So, who would have ever thought that was going to happen
totally
20 years ago? So I want to jump into some of the experiences that you've had. Like it's I feel like Bright Cove was your foundational experience. Would that be fair, or was there something other than that you would say was your foundational experience?
I mean, Bright Cove is where I really experienced rapid growth, getting towards an IPO, and really getting to that kind of an outcome. Had another exit since then, and other experiences in more recent years in the deep tech side. But yeah, Bright Cove is where as I say, it's like that's where I learned how to sell. That was a really fun time.
Right. And you started here and then you moved to London, correct?
That's right.
Can you just walk through like that learning experience of going into it? Like, as you know, we share the international experience, but I always like to get other people to talk about how they experienced it, what what that meant to them, and how you bring that back here.
Yeah, I think that it was certainly a very formative experience. I treasure the experience and encourage people, if they can get international experience, to go get it. It opens up your perspectives in so many ways, and so it's so different in Europe, especially back then, where if I'm generalizing, in Europe, to do a deal, it's harder to do a deal. They're not as willing to take risks. It's much more relationship based. It's much more, they want to see you, they want to shake your hand, they want to know that you're there and who you are. But it cuts both ways, because in the US, you can do a deal over the phone. At the time, you could do deals over the phone, people never, having met you, but they're also much more willing to cut you loose. Whereas on the flip side, they're willing to stay with you longer because you got that relationship, right? So it does cut both ways there that way. It's a fantastic experience, and for me, regardless of where I'm based, it's I've got a global outlook on businesses.
Does that change your perspective when you're investing?
On the investing side, and I've done some deals here in the U.S. in my past lives and so on. some of them are really mainly US companies. And so the international could be a part of the upside case. And then others are clearly global from day one. And so, that you just sort of have to underwrite it differently that way.
I mentioned to you when we talked about this, at Butler, where we spent a couple of years, and I joined as an advisor for a little while. I remember the early days, and it was one of the things I really respected about the way you did it. We all looked at the market and said, "Oh, it's the elder care market, the independent living, the assisted living," and you pulled the reins back and said, "Hold on, it was just coming out of COVID," and you pointed the direction at you pointed the course of go to market at corporate, go back to the office, which didn't seem like it was going to be the long-term market, but it seemed like the right thing to do, which I normally shy away from a short-term market, but it was the right thing to do because of where the product was at. Can you just unpack what your thought was at the time and how you were right and that strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it was looking at, like, with a horizontal technology, you're always like, the trick of it is like find the beachhead, right, which gets you going and focus instead of spreading yourself too thin across too many markets. We did this exercise with pilots and kits for a bunch of different use cases on fundamentally spatial analytics, and what was for me, I was super interested in the elder care, senior care, monitoring side of things. But, again, this goes to product readiness as well, right? Where it's one thing if you're trying to understand how many people have come through a building or not, or what percentage is a conference room used during the day to be able to make real estate decisions. It's another thing if you're missing someone who's fallen and they're lying on the floor and you're like the one, you're like the main system to be able to do that, right? It's just a much higher bar. So you want to think about it as like from a product maturity perspective, like what is the lower bar to really get this thing scaled and work out all the kinks and so on before going for a higher bar? That's number one. Number two is, of course, like the kind of market pull and willingness to pay. That was all really strong in the commercial office segment. And even if there was like a particular spike in demand due to COVID, it seemed like even, post that, there would still be a need to instrument buildings to better understand how they're used and better run those buildings, right? That was a bet we made. And I think we're, very happy with that bet because, even it's like, would you today launch a new building or office and not instrument it to know what it is? It's crazy. It's like, would you ever launch a product and not instrument it to know how it's being used? No. But yet you've got this massive asset class that is not instrumented today. And so part of the thesis is that's going to change in the future. And so an occupancy detection, spatial analytics will just be part of the stack.
Excellent. I love it. And you've taken on the role of the CEO of Actia. Can you walk me through your current role and what you guys are doing, what your plans are? Yeah.
So Actia is different in many ways than what I've done, but also similar in the sense that it's a deep tech sensing play. So I'll give you the kind of quick summary. So blood pressure is a vital sign and a key biomarker. In fact, it's called the king of all biomarkers by some doctors because it's so important. It impacts every organ of your body. And over time, if you have too high blood pressure, which is known as hypertension, essentially your organs fail. So it's like the one biomarker for longevity that any doctor would take over anything else. So it impacts your kidneys, your heart, so heart attacks and strokes. It's very much linked to your eyes and blindness. It's linked to sleep disorders, metabolic. You sort of go down the line. So hypertension is a big deal. It's the number one disease in the world. It's 1.3 billion people have it. And the crazy part, and Brian, I kind of like underwrote this as an investor because I was like, okay, if I'm gonna invest my capital, my human capital into this, like let me go look at it. So okay, 1.3 billion people have it. Okay, great. That sounds big. Only 20% are in control of their blood pressure. That's weird. Why is that? Is it because the treatments are expensive? Well, no, the treatments are cheap. They're generic. They're freely available. Okay, bizarre. And then get this, Brian, only half of people with hypertension even know they have it in the first place, which is bonkers. Then I was like, why? Something is wrong. Something's broken. What is it? Well, there's that old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. And blood pressure today is measured with things like this, which is a cuff, which you wrap around your arm, you get at the doctor's office. Right?
I hate it.
This is a technology. This is the technology that was invented in the 1800s. As a result, it is this antiquated paradigm that this whole big disease and biomarker is being measured with. It's bonkers. It's crazy. And so as a result, blood pressure, it's like a point in time measurement when you want to know frequent measurements because it's changing all the time. Number two, it's inconvenient. So you say you hate it. People hate doing it. It's literally stopping the flow of your artery and seeing how it builds back up. That's the pressure, right? And third, which blew my mind, is it's notoriously inaccurate. So even when you're doing it, you might be doing it wrong. Cuff size matters, how you do it, your position, all this stuff. And then white coat syndrome is very well known in the doctor's offices. So this whole thing is based off of bad, infrequent, incomplete data, which is crazy. So Actia has pioneered how a cuffless blood pressure monitoring, where with off-the-shelf optical sensors like the one I'm wearing on my wrist right now, we capture optical signals and transform those into blood pressure measurements. And we're closing the feedback loop. Essentially, we're closing that feedback loop. We're giving you your numbers so you can then take action with those numbers. And we're seeing our users do that already today. We're going to be announcing a new breakthrough as well that's going to help radically increase the availability and accessibility for blood pressure checking around the world. So really excited about that. But for me, this was game changing. More I looked into it, the more excited I got about the opportunity to really lengthen people's lives and create economic value. And it's a personal mission because it's killed people in my family. I know a lot of people in my family that have hypertension. And so this just felt like my calling.
That's fantastic. I love it. And from a business development perspective, from a sales model perspective, it seems different than. Is it different than anything you've ever done? Your career's almost all been B2B technology. Is this still B2B? To walk me through your go-to-market.
It kind of comes full circle because the first thing in my career in tech was a platform where there was both a B2C and a B2B element, and that's really. We're predominantly B2C right now, and in health tech, that's like becoming a playbook where you go direct to consumer, you gather data, you get revenue, you establish a brand and awareness, and then you start laying the foundations on the B2B side. But we're leveraging these trends that are just out there, right? The consumerization of healthcare, willingness to pay out of pocket, adoption of tech, especially as the baby boomers start retiring, they're much more willing to adopt tech in that regard. And then just this, I think also COVID triggered this, is like this kind of like changing awareness of being more proactive about your health, being more preventative as well. And so we're riding all those tailwinds.
And it's a currently U.S. based company, strictly?
Actually, no. It's the opposite. It's mainly a European company. So it was started in Switzerland. The founders are based there, and most of our activity is in Europe. That's where we have regulatory approval, and right now on the pathway to get the same in the U.S.
What's that take for you in the U.S.? Does it need FDA?
It does, yeah. So blood pressure, unlike heart rate, unlike some of these other things, is regulated. It's a real medical, it's that important. It's regulated. And so we're on the FDA pathway. for that. Feel really good about it. But yeah, that's part of the like what you got to do to enter a given market.
So how much of your time is spent in Europe at the moment?
Good amount, because, getting to know the team, getting to, also fundraising as well now. So, I'm going back there actually next week, but it's it's something where it actually lets me reconnect with my European roots as well, going through the UK and
Right.
it's the French speaking part of Switzerland where, where I speak enough French to get by and so on. So it's been fun to do that.
That sounds great. Are you still investing, or are you done with that for the moment?
I'm still a venture partner at Hyperplane, and so we'll source and look at deals for them and so on as well. So that's something I've really enjoyed doing in the past. Actia is what really is my full-time job and much more. But
Of course.
but yeah, I've speak to entrepreneurs from time to time about their businesses and can sponsor them moving forward.
Two final questions for you. One is, what do you look for in an investment? Like when you get really excited about an investment, if there's one or two things that really get your attention, what is it? What are they? Sorry.
It's the core insight that it's all based on. And it tends to be some combination of a technology and a market insight. And that's what it is. It's like, what is the core insight and what must be true for that to happen? And how big could it be if it does?
And do you have an example of that?
So earlier this year, before Actia, I led Hyperplane's investment into a company called Farm Blocks. And they're essentially helping instrument farms to help them run more efficiently. And so some of the core insights were like, why hasn't this been done before? Why now? Right. And it was clear, like, farms have more connectivity, the labor shortages, and also just like the technology is a lot more mature now than before. And this team was remarkable because they had started with maple syrup farms for leak detection and then gone into other verticals in farms, high value crops like vineyards, orchards, and so on. And what was great about it is, like, they were using off the shelf sensors, right? So they weren't investing so much in that. It was really the connectivity that and making it happen and having user experience, right? So it felt really scalable. In fact, when they came to us, something like 90% of their sensors had been installed by the farmer, right? Which I've not seen businesses like that. So we got really excited about it, and then the team were really impressive. And so, but the core insight is like, will farms be instrumented and be more automated because of labor, because of these other considerations like being more sustainable, like water usage and so on? Yes, like we totally believe that, right? And then it was like, okay, does this architecture, the way they're thinking about it, make sense, and is it differentiated? That felt really that checked the box. Is this the team to do it? And that's obviously a bet we made as well.
I agree with you. When I saw them, I love that they use off the shelf sensors and they weren't trying to invent anything. That was super impressive. The final question is, if you could go back to whether it's 21-year-old self right out of college or 5 years of experience, but your younger self, what advice would you give yourself? Or somebody else starting out wanting to do something entrepreneurial, either join a company or start their own business, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say at that early stage, like, optimize for learning and the people you're going to learn from. So don't optimize, you need basic, you need enough income and so on, but don't optimize for kind of titles and so on. Optimize for like what you're going to learn and from whom, because those people you can then work with in later stages, right? And so there's nothing that beats that, like learning from awesome people. And so that's what I would make sure, like, I would do instead of like going for something like a shiny object.
It's fantastic advice. I love it. Thank you very much. It's great to have you, and good luck with Atika, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge success.
Thanks, Brian. It was fun.
Thanks.
you.